You're now watching the political segment on The Weekend Show. My name is Andy Madaki. In Nigeria, we have three arms of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. They are meant to act as watchdogs over each other, and this is what separation of power is called. However, we've had several National Assembly where they've been referred to as rubber stamp because in most cases they seem to be doing the bidding of the executive. This has also made people question the judiciary if they are being fair and transparent or if they are doing the bidding of the executive once again. A good evidence of this is the lack of accountability when it comes to the National Assembly in some cases which we have seen recently. However, we do have some good eggs and some bad eggs, and we do have some people who ensure that there is accountability. A good example is the House of Representatives, where they came out recently to state that what they had submitted in the tax reform bill is different from what was gazetted. But moving away from that, Clause 60, subsection 3 of the Electoral Act ensures that votes, or was proposed that votes should be transmitted, results, electronically. However, what we currently have is in the clause says that this is based on the discretion of the Independent National Electoral Commission. At a time where countries like Estonia are conducting their elections fully electronically, in Nigeria, all the people are asking for is when votes are counted and this sheets are signed, it should be uploaded and transmitted using the IRF platform, which millions and millions were used to create. However, this got rejected by the Senate. How do we feel about this? Former Minister Obi Ezekwesili has said the Senate or the National Assembly is playing with fire. A former INEC commissioner, Lekki, has also said that Nigeria isn't ready for this yet. However, all over Nigeria, you could see a Money Point POS or an OPay POS. You could see Coca-Cola, you could see MTN, Glo, Airtel, or Nine Mobile. If we have all of this in every single part of Nigeria, why are we shying away from having good and responsive elections? That's what we'll be talking about on the political segment. And joining us, my co-host.
Thank you so much, Mr. Andy, for that prompt monologue. And we are going to be having this conversation with Chidozie Aja. He is the Special Advisor Legislative to the Deputy Speaker, House of Representatives. Thank you so much for joining me. All right, and we also have a data analyst in the house. He is Oluwafemi John Adebayo. He's an electoral integrity advocate and also head of research and strategy, Kimpact Development Initiative. So we're going to be having a lot of data
Thank you for having
analysis.
me.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Olafemi, I'll start with you before we come to him, so that it's not like we're constantly attacking the government, but make the average Nigerian understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, so at this point, and we're at a crossroad where we're talking about electoral reform. So after the 2023 general elections, we saw a lot of dissenting emotions, right, depending on who you're supporting, and that is irrelevant in this conversation. But what matters is Nigerians are talking about the fact that there is a need for us to reform this process. We want something better. And one of the clamor, right, one of the major subject matter is electronic transmission of election result, among many others, right? But we've seen December, the House of Reps actually did a lot of work, clause by clause consideration, and we saw some progressives, and advancement in what they propose in terms of reform, and they okayed it, if I'm good to use the word. But we're all waiting for the Senate because there's a need for the Senate to do their job also. And we waited, and we learned that the Senate will resume on the 27th of January. And I think I was on HIT for about 2 times to talk about the fact that every productive institution had resumed maybe the first week. But it took civil society, media, even Nigerians to technically protest, to say you need to consider this because of time. Knowing fully well that in this country, Nigeria, there are presidents that have rejected electoral amendment because it's close to the elections. And there are ECOWAS protocol to say you cannot amend the electoral law 6 months, right? Now, the Senate decided to consider this bill, or the bills, or the amendments, and eventually we saw there are some things that are taking us back, retrogressive. For instance, talking about Section 63, where the Senate president actually said, and these are the confusion on the street, we passed electronic transmission, but we retained what was in Electoral Act 2022. And what is in Electoral Act 2022 is basically simple. It gives INEC discretionary power to decide on what to do. That's the first thing. Now, if you look at, I think just 2 days ago, the opposition senators came out, led by Senator Einaya Baribe, said that no, what we have and what we passed, even after we left the closed door section, is electronic transmission, right? And I also listened to the spokesperson of the Senate also saying that we are not even ready because coverage, internet coverage, or maybe network coverage in the country is low. Now, this is the crossroad we are. The question for every Nigerian and for civil society like us is, what exactly did the Senate pass? Now, however, the challenge here is that if there is a diversion or a different version of the bill from the Senate and the House, there is a need for harmonization. So, what do we want? That's for Nigerians. I think Nigerians are saying that transmit our election result from the polling unit, not transfer. Transmit our election result from the polling unit to the high ref so that we can see from the polling unit. And why is this compulsory and necessary? And why do we need to use the word mandatory? Is that if we go back to after the 2023 general elections, the Presidential Election Petition Court up to the Supreme Court actually positioned, the position of the judgment is that anything outside of the Electoral Act, it's alien to the law, including the INEC guideline. So, and that is why it is necessary that the Section 63 is actually written clearly without ambiguity.
And just to also interject and provide some clarification for Nigerians, I think his name was Barrister Festus Okoye, in the 2023 election, had stated on media over and over again that INEC was prepared to transmit using IRF over and over again.
Right.
After the election, then they came out to say it was just a guideline and they are not compelled to do that.
Right.
Which is why this question is now being brought up.
Right.
And also, just for Nigerians to remember, for you to register for your voter's card,
Right.
they come with devices connected to the internet
Right.
to do your registration. And so if you could register people
Right.
using electronic devices to be able to vote, how does it make sense to now say because of internet penetration, we can't transmit
So
results?
electronic transmission or electronic voting,
And it doesn't have to be real time.
electronic transmission or electronic voting is not internet voting and is not internet
Yes.
transmission. I think Nigerians need to get that clearly, including our lawmakers.
Especially the lawmakers.
Right. They need to get that clearly. And what matters here is, or another, adding to all of the points you've raised, right, is that BVAS was actually used across the country in 2023. Now, what happened to IREV, right? They told us it's technical glitches, right? But we were on the IREV towards result section of that process. The results were coming in.
Yes.
It's not like they were not coming in, but they were blurry. At some point, you can't see anything. You can't trace anything from what was coming in. That is not a problem of maybe transmission or movement. It's a technological or maybe infrastructural back-end related conversation. So it has nothing to do with movement of that result. That is the first point to raise. How is INEC able to use beavers across? And they were able to even transmit or transfer, let me use their word now, senatorial elections or House of Rep elections from all of those senatorial districts across the country, but only presidential was not clear on IREF. So for me, it's not a problem of maybe internet or infrastructure. I think it's a lie, and I think the Senate or maybe the National Assembly needs to stop lying to Nigerians, since with all sense of sincerity.
Let's bring him in.
Now we have to bring the government into the conversation. What are your perspectives on this matter?
Very serious. In the first place, I want Nigerians to understand that the National Assembly has its powers to regulate its proceedings. And that extends to the manner and the nature and the form in which laws are passed. in as much as the processes are spelled out and are known, but they can decide to go route A or route B to achieve the same result. Number two, we need to also understand that documents before the parliament should begin to be clear, unambiguous.
Right.
Why am I saying so? What was introduced to the parliament was what they call the Electoral Act Repeal and Enactment Bill, which in its form is different from Electoral Act Amendment. Okay? Now, it was our own opinion that if you want to alter a document and your alteration is not more than 20% of that document, why do you want to repeal and reenact completely? You get it? Now, that was what brought a lot of confusion on this process. If you look at the report that was presented both to the House and to the Senate, you'll be seeing the provisions of the Electoral Act 2022. You'll be seeing the provisions of the Electoral Act or Repeal and Enactment Bill on this side. Then you'll be seeing the recommendations of the committee. In studying that document, in the process of passage of that document, you find out that some people might be referring to column 1, others referring to column 2, and in most cases, confusion will breed, confusion will come in. Okay? So when someone is telling you that we have passed clause XYZ, that clause XYZ is referring to may not tally with section XYZ on the act.
For clarity,
Good.
the bill was passed from the House of Reps to the Senate. Is it the same bill that was passed from the House of Senate, from the House of Reps, rather, that is this repeal document that was in the Senate? Or are there two conflicting documents?
No, there are not two conflicting documents. In the first instance, we need to know that there was a joint committee of the House and the Senate, which sat, reviewed the document, produced a report, which was placed before the House, equally placed before the Senate. It just happened that the House proceeded with their own document and passed. And in the process, the House insisted on passing Electoral Act Amendment Bill as against Electoral Act Repeal and Enactment Bill. You understand?
Because that was the right thing to do. Because that was the right thing.
That was the right to do.
Just repealing and
okay?
reenacting.
Now, remember at that point also, the Senate already had their own document, the same document presented in the Senate. So Senate proceeded with the document that was presented to it. Meanwhile, the House had passed what they had passed. Does that make any sense?
Yes. But there was a joint committee, and as big as Nigeria is, this is Abuja, they should be able to sit down and have this conversation. And I say this because it must be frustrating to the leadership of the House of Reps that time is spent, almost 3 times the number of the people in the Senate, deliberate over issues and bills. They pass something, it gets to the Senate, and we see a different story. Isn't that frustrating, and doesn't that make... How is the leadership taking it? How is your principal handling this? Because this is not the first time. We saw this with the tax bill. We're saying this now, and those are the ones we know about because we care about. So what is really going on in the National Assembly? And because this is now becoming a source of embarrassment to everybody.
Not really, sir. I say so because we operate a bicameral legislature. And if you put 2-3 persons in a room to have a conversation on an issue, their opinion will differ.
Of course.
You don't expect at all times that the position of the Senate and that of the House will be the same. That is the essence of being or having a bicameral legislature. But the good thing is that once they pass whatever document, whatever process, whatever law, whatever motion, whatever bills, once they are passed, they are brought, if there are substantial differences, they go for conference. And at that level of conference, these things are sorted out to the best interest of Nigerians. So to this extent, I would say, even if the Senate had passed what we as Nigerians do not appreciate. There is still the room, okay, for these things to be corrected, because the conference committee of both houses is already in place, and I trust they will bring in.
This is just the beginning of this conversation, and hopefully if you're both available, we have to continue this conversation next week. Because of time, I have to stop now, but I'll give you 30 seconds. How should Nigerians deal with this?
Yeah, I think the call to action is just basically that Nigerians need to reach out to their senators, because every senator comes from each of the constituency or senatorial district. Reach out to them that this is what we want as Nigerians: electronic transmission of election result from the polling unit, and that it should also be clear what IREF will do, because as it stands now, IREF is just a VIN porter. So it should be clear, and what it is that you snap ECATA and put it and dump it. IREF doesn't collate. So it should be spelled out that IREF should collate the result.
Especially with artificial intelligence, which we have.
Right.
We spent 3 times what South Africa spent,
Right.
and I've seen a picture of their collation center and
yeah.
ours, and it's a
Yeah.
big disgrace and embarrassment. But that's the much we can take on today's episode of The Weekend Show. Thank you, gentlemen,
Thank
and
you so
Lucy
much.
for being a great spot. You can watch this episode and more on YouTube at Weekend Show NG. We're also on social media at AIT_Weekend Show. We're on all social media platforms. We will continue to hold government and the people accountable, as well as breaking things down to the barest minimum for the everyday Nigerian. My name is Andy Madaki.
And I am Lucy Ujiti. Have a wonderful weekend.
See you next week. My name is Andy Madaki.
Time for sports. I remain Monday Thomas.
I'm Senda Chimelu, and you're now on